What does it take to change a nation? A dream? A leader? Or the courage of one man who stood against hate, fear, and violence and chose to fight with love? This is the story of Martin Luther King Jr., the man who turned dreams into a movement and a movement into history. Stay tuned, because the journey you're about to hear will not just change how you see the past, but inspire how you shape the future. In the quiet streets of Atlanta, Georgia, on January 15, 1929, a cry was heard that would one day shake the foundations of injustice. Martin Luther King Jr. was born into a world deeply divided by the color of one's skin. Yet within the walls of his family home, young Martin was taught a different reality, one built on faith, dignity, and love. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a fiery Baptist preacher who spoke boldly against racial discrimination from the pulpit. His mother, Alberta Williams King, a former schoolteacher, nourished Martin's mind and spirit with stories of strength, perseverance, and pride in his heritage. Even as a boy, Martin absorbed lessons of resilience that would one day fortify him against the storms ahead. But childhood was not free from pain. Martin felt the sting of segregation early. At just 6 years old, he lost his two best friends, white boys, when their parents forbade them from playing with him. It was a wound that ran deep, planting in Martin a question that would shape his destiny. Why should a person's worth be measured by the color of their skin? School came easily to him. He was a gifted student, skipping 2 grades and entering Morehouse College at the age of 15. It was there that the fire inside him grew brighter. Inspired by the sermons of his father and the writings of philosophers, Martin realized that ministry was not just about preaching. It was about action. It was about healing a broken nation. Martin Luther King Jr. was not born a dreamer by accident. He was shaped by a family that believed in justice, a faith that refused to bow to hatred, and a calling that whispered to him even as a young man, "There is more for you to do." The dream had begun, and it would not be silenced. The air in Montgomery, Alabama, was thick with quiet anger and worn-down hope. In buses, stores, and sidewalks, the heavy hand of segregation pressed down on every black citizen. It was a world where the color of your skin dictated your worth, and every day was a test of patience and survival. In December 1955, one brave woman decided she had endured enough. Rosa Parks, weary from a lifetime of injustice, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Her quiet act of defiance became the spark that lit the fire of a revolution. The black community of Montgomery rallied quickly, but they needed a leader, someone with courage, wisdom, and vision. They turned to a young pastor new to the city, one who spoke with a voice that seemed to carry both thunder and tenderness. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin was hesitant at first. He knew the danger that would come with standing at the front. Threats, violence, jail, all were almost certain. But his conscience would not let him turn away. If not now, when? He must have wondered. If not me, who? The Montgomery bus boycott began, a peaceful protest that would stretch over 381 grueling days. Families walked miles to work. Mothers and fathers endured harassment and hardship. Martin became the heartbeat of their cause, preaching not hatred but love, not violence but steadfast resistance. The struggle was fierce. His home was bombed. His life was threatened countless times. But Martin stood firm. Each speech he gave, each meeting he led, made it clear, we are not wrong for wanting dignity. We are not wrong for demanding justice. When the Supreme Court finally ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional, the people of Montgomery rejoiced. It wasn't just a victory for a city. It was the birth of a movement. Martin Luther King Jr. had found his calling, and the nation had found a voice that would not be silenced. As the winds of change began to sweep across the South, Martin Luther King Jr. faced a critical decision. How would this movement fight? Would they meet violence with violence, hatred with hatred, or was there a higher path? From the depths of his soul and the teachings of his faith, Martin chose a harder road, the way of nonviolence. Inspired by the teachings of Jesus Christ and the strategy of Mahatma Gandhi, he believed that true victory could only be won through love, courage, and peaceful resistance. Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon, he preached, which cuts without wounding and ennobles a man who wields it. It was a strategy that would be tested in fire. In Birmingham, Alabama, A city described as the most segregated in America, Martin and his fellow activists launched a bold campaign against racial injustice. Peaceful marches were met with snarling police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses. Children were thrown into jail alongside adults. Fear and fury filled the air. Yet Martin stood firm, clad in dignity. He knelt in prayer as batons swung around him. He sat in jail cells, penning words that would move the world. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The letter from Birmingham jail became a blueprint for moral courage, calling on people of conscience not to remain silent in the face of wrong. Television screens across America flickered with images of the brutality. Ordinary citizens who had once turned away could no longer deny what they saw. Sympathy turned into outrage. Support turned into momentum. The fire of nonviolence, lit in Montgomery, now raged across the country, not with destruction, but with undeniable power. Martin's strategy was clear: win the battle for hearts and minds without losing the soul of the movement. The world was watching, and the world was beginning to listen. By 1963, the call for justice could no longer be contained to the streets of the South. It was echoing to the heart of the nation. The time had come for a bold statement, a gathering so powerful that it could no longer be ignored. On August 28, 1963, more than 250,000 men, women, and children, black, white, and every shade in between, flooded the National Mall in Washington, D.C. They came by foot, by bus, by train, answering the cry for freedom and jobs, answering the call for dignity. It was there, at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, that Martin Luther King Jr. rose to speak. At first, he followed his prepared notes, calling for an end to segregation, for civil rights legislation, for justice long denied. But then, urged by the voice of gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." He set the papers aside. His voice lifted higher, filled with something greater than politics, greater than protest. It was filled with vision. "I have a dream," he declared. A dream where little black boys and black girls could join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. A dream where justice rolled down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. A dream where the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners could sit together at the table of brotherhood. The words soared across the crowd and into the soul of a nation. It was more than a speech. It was a mirror held up to America's broken promises, and a map pointing toward a better future. The March on Washington did not end racism overnight, nor did it erase injustice, but it shook the conscience of millions. It awakened hearts that had been asleep. It made clear that the dream was not just Martin's dream. It was a dream for all humanity, and it could no longer be ignored. The dream was alive, but so were the dangers. As Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice grew louder, so did the threats against him. Each step forward in the struggle for justice was met with fierce resistance, from angry mobs, from violent authorities, and even from those who believed change was coming too fast. Yet Martin pressed on. He marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, where peaceful protesters were met with tear gas and brutal beatings on what became known as Bloody Sunday. He stood side by side with sanitation workers in Memphis, their signs declaring boldly, "I am a man." He traveled to cities where hatred boiled over, where churches were bombed, and where innocent lives were lost. But Martin's spirit remained unbroken. He expanded his fight beyond civil rights to include economic justice and opposition to the Vietnam War. He spoke not just for Black Americans, but for the poor, the voiceless, and forgotten, calling on the nation to live up to its highest ideals. Still, the road grew heavier, the nights darker. Death threats became daily shadows. On April 3, 1968, in Memphis, Martin stood before a crowd one last time. His voice carried a deep and mysterious knowing as he spoke. "I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land." The very next evening, as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, an assassin's bullet struck him down. The world wept, but it did not break. Martin Luther King Jr. had left a legacy too powerful to be buried. His life had proved that love is stronger than hate, that courage is stronger than fear, and that even in the face of death, a dream can live on. The march toward justice continues because he marched first. Martin Luther King Jr. walked through storms most of us can only imagine, yet he never gave up. His courage, his vision, and his sacrifice carved a path where none had existed before. He showed us that true leadership is not about power, but about service. Not about fame, but about faith. Today, the dream he spoke of is still alive, but it needs us to carry it forward. In every act of kindness, in every stand for justice, in every voice raised for what is right, we honor his legacy. The question now is simple. Will we be brave enough to walk in his footsteps? Will we be bold enough to dream beyond fear? Thank you for joining me in this journey through the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. If a story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe just a little more in the power of courage, subscribe to this channel.